Hi there and welcome to Anchor Point. I'm Randy Crossan. Today we're looking at several recent Canadian laws that raise concerns about how far government power reaches into personal freedoms, privacy, and individual rights. Let's start with Bill C-26, the Support Authorized Access to Information Act. Bill C-26 is a proposed Canadian law that would let police and CSIS get certain digital information from phone and internet companies more easily, including metadata like location, timestamps, and device or network details. In some cases, this information could be obtained without a warrant. This bill allows the government to compel telecom companies to provide information and issue orders without prior judicial authorization in some cases. Why is this a problem? It can bypass the usual requirement for a warrant, and the scope of data requested can be broad and undefined. The government says the goal is to speed up investigations into online crime and that the law does not allow access to the content of the messages, only basic technical data. Courts have consistently held that warrantless access to private communication data is presumptively unconstitutional unless tightly constrained. Under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 8 protects against unreasonable search and seizure. The bill allows confidential orders and restrictions on companies disclosing that they've received government demands. This engages Section 2B, freedom of expression. Many are concerned that companies and indirectly the public may be prevented from knowing about government surveillance or directives, undermining transparency in public debate. Bill C-26 will allow police and CSIS to access sensitive digital information without a warrant, including location, time, and network information that can reveal detailed patterns of a person's life. This raises privacy concerns because this type of data can be highly revealing even without message content. It also lowers the threshold of judicial oversight by allowing access without prior approval from a judge, which removes a key safeguard in privacy law. There are concerns that the scope of what can be accessed could expand over time through interpretation or future changes, and that after-the-fact review does not prevent the initial privacy intrusion. The legislation gives federal ministers power to order companies to take any measure deemed necessary for cybersecurity and imposes compliance requirements with limited oversight. The language is vague, leaving room for wide discretion, not allowing for real-time judicial review. This raises Section 7 concerns, the right to life, liberty, and security, and generally the rule of law. Next is Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, a proposed Canadian law that expands the criminal code around hate speech, hate crimes, and access to certain public spaces like places of worship, schools, and community centers. It creates new offenses for intimidation or obstruction of access to those places, strengthens penalties for hate-motivated crimes, and adds rules around the public display of certain hate or terrorist symbols. It originally removed some procedural barriers that previously required Attorney General consent before hate propaganda charges could proceed, and it narrows certain defenses related to religious expression in hate speech cases. Bill C-9 removes the good faith religious speech defense from the criminal code, while amendments restore the requirement for the Attorney General consent before hate speech prosecutions can proceed. Enforcement still involves significant discretion by authorities. The bill also gives regulators broad power to remove or penalize online content considered harmful or intolerant, but these terms are not clearly defined. This creates concern that ordinary discussion, religious teaching, or public opinion could be misclassified as unlawful. There are also concerns that hate propaganda provisions could be triggered through private complaints, which may lead to individuals facing investigations or legal proceedings over lawful speech. Even when speech is ultimately found to be legal, the process itself could involve significant time, cost, and legal pressure to defend it. A current example is Finland, where the former Minister of the Interior, Päivi Räsänen, was recently charged under similar legislation for content she posted on the internet several years ago. As the content was still available on the internet, it was considered current, even though it was perfectly legal at the time she posted it. Next is Bill C-8, a cybersecurity law that gives the federal government more power to control and direct how telecom companies and critical infrastructure operators respond to cyber threats. It allows government to order companies to take specific actions during security incidents and to share certain information related to those threats. The concerns are about how much control this gives government over private communication systems and how little transparency there may be around some of those orders. There are also concerns about limited oversight, meaning decisions could be made and enforced without much public or judicial review. Another concern is that broad powers used for cybersecurity could expand over time into more routine monitoring or direction of private digital systems. Bill C-4, the Making Life More Affordable for Canadians Act, deals with how federal political parties in Canada collect, store, and use personal voter data. It sets rules for data handling inside political party systems and is meant to create a basic framework for privacy and accountability in how parties manage information about Canadians. The concerns are that political parties are not held to the same strict privacy standards as other organizations that handle similar personal data. There are also concerns about weak enforcement, limited oversight, and the lack of clear independent review if data is misused. Another concern is that the voters may not fully know how their information is being collected or used once it enters party databases. Bill C-5 is a federal law that lets the government fast-track major infrastructure and resource projects by calling them in the national interest and pushing them through faster approval processes. The concerns are that it puts too much decision-making power in Cabinet, since they decide which projects gets fast-tracked and which rules get relaxed. It can weaken normal checks like environmental reviews and public consultation, especially with Indigenous communities who may not have the same time or influence in the process. There are also concerns that speeding things up means less scrutiny of risks, impacts, and long-term consequences. And once this kind of fast-track system exists, there's concern it could be used more often over time, making it easier to bypass standard approval steps for future projects. These are all different bills, but they share a pattern in the same kinds of federal government powers being expanded or adjusted. More access to personal data without traditional warrants, the potential criminalization of good faith religious speech, faster enforcement timelines that compress review and appeal, more centralized decision-making in government hands, and broader authority that often relies on after-the-fact oversight rather than approval before action is taken. And finally, leaving the door open for anyone standing for their beliefs to be targeted. Taken together, this is a shift in how Canadians' freedoms are protected in practice. It makes personal privacy easier for the state to access, lowers the threshold for obtaining information, and moves more decisions into systems where actions come first and reviews come later. Over time, this will shift the balance between individual rights and government authority. Freedoms may still exist in law, but will they exist in reality? That's the question. This has been Anchor Point. See you next time.